Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Now, I'm sure all of us have at one point or another been a victim of the why game. You know, the seemingly endless cycle of torture in which you're asked a question and you give the answer and the follow-up question is, why? So you answer that too, and that cycle continues over and over until you blow up because you don't have a rationale for the meaning of life or our existence in this universe. Now, the why game is typically played by very small children, and there's a reason for that. Warren Berger mentions in his book, A More Beautiful Question, that a child asks 40,000 questions between the ages of 2 and 5. But what happens after that? Well, that type of questioning just stops. It would appear as if an adolescent wakes up one day and suddenly all their childhood curiosity is gone. But is it really? Now, as a high school teacher, this got me thinking about the students in my own classroom. I was recently reading Jenny Magaria's Courageous Adventures as part of a book study I'm doing, and something she said really resonated with me. She stated, "The first thing that was evident to me was that our students had forgotten how to truly wonder. They had questions, but not the patience to follow their questions down a path to an unknown destination." Now, when I first read that, I thought the universe was gift wrapping this for me to put in my talk, but really she had so eloquently stated exactly what I had believed all along. For a teacher, that's a hallelujah moment. One of my assistant principals told our staff in a professional development that kids come to school naturally curious, but we're not fostering that curiosity in our classrooms. He wasn't wrong. What followed, though, was a discussion about the questions we as teachers were asking. His argument was that kids were not curious because our questions were bad. They were too low level. We needed to increase the rigor. So after that, I made it my goal to ask the best questions that I possibly could, because I didn't want to be that teacher to kill my students' curiosity with bad questions. Now, for a while, I did okay. I spent hours scripting the most perfect questions, trying to come up with the tough ones that would lead students on this adventure into curiosity. I would pride myself on stimulating these classroom discussions that encouraged casual onlookers and observers to describe my class with the best buzzwords possible, like student engagement and critical thinking. I would often have students and colleagues say to me, "You know, that was a really good question." But now what I'm discovering is that wasn't really the case. You see, as a teacher, when I ask students questions, I'm generally trying to get students to think about a particular aspect of the content, or I'm trying to lead them in a certain direction. Because if they come up with an answer to my question, I can quantify that as learning. But were my kids taking these questions down the proverbial rabbit hole into true curiosity? I guarantee you, my kids did not go home at the end of the day and think about why an author used a metaphor of a flower in the rain instead of a simile about light and dark to describe the relationship between life and death. More realistically, their question was, what is a metaphor? Or even, most likely of all, they didn't think about my class at all once they walked out the door. Now, many of our students are adept at answering clarifying questions. You know, the ones that you can Google to find the answer? But they lack the skills and knowledge to truly wonder. This is the whole premise of the why game they were so good at when they were children. So here's the real question. How do students go from being masters at this game to adolescents who could seemingly care less about anything? The best answer I can come up with is ego. Now, I'm not talking about the adolescent, I'm too cool for school ego. I'm talking about ours, the adult ego. Think about how many times adults ask the question, why? Probably not as often as you think. We may secretly think to ourselves, why is my boss making me do this? Or why are my kids acting this way? Or why can't the house clean itself? But we never ask these questions out loud. We seem to know better. Think about it. When was the last time you were truly curious? If you're honest, it was probably as a child. So here's my theory. At some point in our lives, we are taught that the question why isn't a question at all. It's a challenge. We are taught to use that question to stimulate argument instead of foster curiosity. We ask why, not because we're interested in deepening our knowledge of a particular topic, but rather because we want the other to justify to us what it is that they've just said. Think about this from a parent perspective. Imagine that you just asked your child to do something at home, or you tell them something is a certain way, and they look at you and they ask, why? What is your typical response? Because I said so. This response is usually coupled with a huff of frustration. But why? Yes, pun intended. Why do we as adults get so offended when a child asks us why? Now, some of us will jump on the child, tell them that they're challenging our authority as an adult, and they should comply with our directives because, well, it came from us. While we do have some teenage angst and rebellion working behind that theory, making it occasionally true, have you ever considered the curiosity factor? Is it at all possible that that child is genuinely curious why something must be done a particular way or at a particular time? The parents in the room are probably thinking, no way, but just bear with me. Every time we respond to the question why with because I said so or a huff of frustration, we are teaching children that why is not an appropriate question, but is a challenge to the authority of the adult. We train children not to ask why, because from our adult perspective, our original explanation should be sufficient, and they dare not suggest otherwise. Over time, kids just give up and stop asking why. In an interesting conversation with my mother about this idea, one thing that she brought up is that when we're asked why, we usually get very defensive, not necessarily because of the question, but because the way the question is asked. While the question itself may be genuine, the delivery of the question is just as important. Take this into the classroom. I'll admit I've been guilty of this throughout my career. I give students a directive or I share some content-related information with them, and they ask me, usually very pointedly, why? Now, if I have a quick answer or a justification, I happily share that with only a mild frustration. I get it, kids like to push the boundaries, no big deal. I am a little bit more reluctant when I don't know the why. I usually try to steer that conversation in a different direction because it's bad for my credibility as a teacher. By the time I get to 8th period, I have been asked why so many times that I snap back into that because I said so mentality. When students first started asking me why, I would take it very personally, as we all do. I would tell students that I am their teacher and they should comply with every reasonable expectation I have of them. Don't worry, that was my bad. I've learned. From my perspective, I knew that I had my students' best interest at heart. I knew I had put a lot of time and effort into planning my lessons and didn't want them challenging the work that I cared so much about. But in doing so, children have either learned consciously or subconsciously that adults don't really care about their questions and actually seem kind of burdened by them. We as adults feel challenged by the why, so shutting down questions becomes our norm. Fast forward several years, and we now have a generation of kids who have stopped asking questions because they've never had someone grant them the permission to do so. And when those questions stop, I believe that is when kids stop thinking critically. It wasn't curiosity that killed the cat. It was our ego that killed curiosity. So what do? Well, to change this structure, a change in mindset and a change in practice have to occur. When I was training to be a teacher, we were well instructed in the types of questions to ask students, but we were never trained how to respond to a question that a student asks of us. When a child asks a question, we like to give them the, "Why are you asking me that?" look, and tell them to go figure it out on their own. We're too afraid of going down the rabbit hole with them and admitting when we don't know something. Hate to break it to you, suit up, we're going. When a child asks you why, seek to understand the root of their question. What is it that they want to know, and what is their purpose for knowing it? As adults, we don't like to look stupid, I know, and we don't like to admit when we don't know something. It's bad for our ego, but our ego is hurting our students. We need to let kids ask why, and we need to explain our why. We need to be prepared to get caught in the endless loop of the why game. It's the only way to foster authentic curiosity. The more curious children become, the more critically they think. And the more critically they think, the better off we all are. So I leave you with this final challenge. When someone asks you why, try to prevent, or at least recognize, the knee-jerk reaction of getting upset that your authority has been challenged. Rather, look at the question as an opportunity for creative thought. Just as importantly, try to help the other person reframe their question, ask what it is they seek to know or understand. If you don't know the why, be willing to admit that. When someone asks why, don't tell them because you said so. Just get ready to get lost in the endless loop that is the why game. Thank you.